everyone. This is the Prototype Thinking Test What Matters workshop. We are Prototype Thinking Labs, and we really specialize in helping companies go from the point where they have an idea and they kind of know broadly what it's supposed to do to figuring out the version of it that will truly work for users in a very short amount of time. This is a process that I've been working on for the past 10 years, combining a lot of principles from the GVA people, agile design thinking, and drawing also a lot from my own personal experience recovering from a traumatic brain injury and kind of relearning the world and analogizing that to how product teams have to relearn the universe kind of anew whenever we build something new for our users. Prototype thinking right now is practiced in over 50 countries, and we have worked with a lot of companies all over the world. We've teamed up with many names that you might recognize to build major solutions that you might see and use in market today, including speakers that you might see in your home or in the airport, mental health platforms at your healthcare provider, cell phone experiences. Just to get us started, what are you creating? What are you working on, and what are you bringing to work on in the workshop today? For example, let's say you're validating your product, or you've recently done a pivot and you're validating your pivot, or you have a very successful user base and you're launching a kind of new feature or service to them. So my next question for you is, on a scale of 0 to 100%, if I were to ask you to take your current best guess about how to design your product, how confident are you that your current best guess is the right answer? Like if you had to design it today, not like how confident are you that you will succeed someday. If you had to build the version of it today, how confident are you? Are you like 50%? 20%, 90%. When we talk about being in the 0 to 1 stage for a company, 0 to 1 exists for every process or for every new project we do, not just when we're launching a company. It's the point where you have a ton of possibilities. You're not sure which one you want to pick. There's many different right answers, and you're dying to work hard, but you're not quite sure what exactly the right solution is. So you can end up losing a lot of time spinning and investing your effort in the wrong direction. Prototype thinking is essentially the process for reliably getting to the right answer and crossing that every single time. So we survey every client we work with, and typically they save somewhere from 6 months to 2 years of time to market. In the 0 to 1 pre-tangible phase, the physics of work works differently. And so I'm going to build up the building blocks of how we think about how progress is made when we are less than 40% confident. So the first principle is that the purpose of building prototypes is not to prove or validate, it's to pivot as efficiently and effectively as we can. In order to express this, I'm going to talk through a lot of different ways to build a prototype. This is actually a story of the first startup that I worked for. This is like where I first started learning about user testing. In the early days of meal delivery, before DoorDash had become like an established industry model, I worked with this founder named Ushma Garg on this company called Gobble. There's a lot of home chefs, and you can customize your menu and all of your dietary restrictions for every member of your family, and then you order it and it shows up at your door. And 20 years ago, this was like a big deal. So late one night, we were staying out because we work in food delivery. Ushma was telling me a story about how she got started, and she was like, oh yeah, I raised $250,000 based on running a bunch of like tests on Craigslist. And I was like, what are you talking about? And so she was like, yeah, when I first started out, I, made some Craigslist posts looking for home chefs to, cook a few home cooked meals. And then I reached out to all of my friends that I knew and said, hey, who wants some home cooked food? And then a bunch of people responded. So every week I started sending out menus to them and then picking up the food and delivering them. So this was like a 1 week, 2 week long iteration process for her, right? And using this process of refinement and nothing else and no software other than these tools, she was able to show like really rapid week over week growth. And using pretty much this approach and nothing else, with a lot of changes week over week, right? As she kind of optimized like her model and what she was offering, what she was communicating, who she was targeting, what chefs she had, she was able to raise a 1.2 million seed round, and they exited a couple of years ago, and they had very, very good exit. So the thing that struck me at the time was I had this model that startups were about technology, right? And that you had to have your technical co-founder and you had to build your technical thing. And the thing that struck me about this so much was that like literally anyone can do this. Like these are all tools that everyone could do. A kind of contrasting story that happened a number of years later. Dick Costolo was the CEO of Twitter, and he left Twitter to start a company called Chorus. And he was super passionate about fitness. And this was the rise of social everything. So having come off of being very successful at Twitter, he wanted to use the power of digital social to help people achieve their fitness goals. He really wanted to take this phenomenon where if you have a group of friends that you go to the gym with, it motivates you to follow your fitness goals. He raised, I think, 6 million to build this kind of digital community idea. Quick show of hands. Does this seem like something that you would do? I've used this as a bunch of examples in the past, and usually about half of people are like, yeah, I would use this. So based on what we learned from Gobble, how would you test Chorus? So let me tell you what actually happened. Costolo raised 6 million. He got this beautiful office in San Francisco. He hired a full engineering and design team, which is why we have these gorgeous screenshots of this app. And they operated for about 8 months and then they shut down. And they shut down because he realized that they were up against what he called hardwired human behavior. So there's this phenomenon known as the abstinence violation effect, which essentially goes that if you're participating in this digital community and you don't do the thing you're supposed to do, you feel bad. And then you don't go into the app and say, hey guys, I didn't work out today. You just ghost the app. And then gradually, this beautiful circle of people who are supposed to check in, more and more of them are ghosting the app every day. This is what we would have done, right? Like we would have figured this out in like 2 weeks with like a group on WhatsApp. And it would have triggered the exact same outcome. We would have noticed everybody ghosting for this reason. Our principle is this is why we're building prototypes to pivot, not just to prove or disprove. So Ushma was able to pivot in 2 weeks, and Costolo took like 8 months to discover that it wasn't working and pivot, which gets to, as founders, our goal is not to validate or disprove. Our goal is to succeed. Failure is not an option. So in order to be successful, the only way to reliably reach success is by pivoting enough that we're able to map out all possible solutions and map out and understand the solution space enough by running tests that are fast enough to give us that overall solution space big picture. These are behavior tests. They cannot be self-reporting. Self-reporting is typically not reliable enough. So rather than getting the answers in 2 weeks, what does it look like if we do this in 2 hours? This is how the prototype thinking user testing approach works. Let's say, hypothetically, your company has invented a car for the first time. If we were to prototype the idea of some type of consumer-owned engine car thing for the first time, what might that look like? Offhand, some things that we might think about are, what does it really mean to own and drive a car? Who does it? What family unit size does it? Is it by person? Is it by family? Is it by neighborhood? How do the controls work? What are the use cases, right? These are all the kind of questions we'd have to solve to launch a car for the first time. So how do we prototype a car? Traditionally, in large tech companies that are some of my clients, you mock up the whole idea and then you build this car and you're like, okay, there's this guy sitting in an awkward L shape pulling this like little ball in this working car. And that was our prototype. In Agile, you take your minimum viable engine and like hook it all up. And like, there's this person on the, like this little wooden vehicle and like, they're like driving their little go-kart around. And that's your prototype of a car. In prototype thinking, we built the minimum unviable car. Here's how you would prototype a car in 2 hours with prototype thinking. I would get a bunch of really burly people. I'd put a person on a chair and a box on a big platform and a second person with a wheelbarrow to carry all their stuff. And then I'd also have me, the experimenter, off here. And I'd see them pulling the whirligigs and be like, go left. And then it's like, stop, walk up the hill. So they get the experience of navigating based on what I'm seeing them do with their whirligigs without any of it functioning. But I'm still able to test the overall experience and use case of using a car. I have a realistic scenario. Maybe they're at home, they're trying to go to the store and go shopping. And what we do is we run the user through a very realistic scenario simulation that's realistic to their life of, okay, you are actually you need some groceries, you're going to the store. This is typically a 10-minute walk for you. But let's say that you recently owned this car thing. What happens? And then we don't look for them to say, yes, I would buy this. No, I wouldn't, because it's too early for validation and yes, no. What we're looking for is to grammatically break down how they understand the situation. So we're looking at their behavior, their expressions, changes in energy, their word choice, things like this that indicate how they're thinking about the solution space. We test only the moment of truth, the core interaction, and nothing else. And this is going to save us remaining 6 months of our building because it only takes us a few hours to cobble this together. Important thing about running a test like this is that it's actually easier to test the really big questions this way. So I just pulled a few of the top unknowns that we talked about with a car, like controls, use case, what should the shape be? And if you think about how you would test each of these questions in these alternative modes, you would still need everything to be successfully hooked up. But in your prototype thinking guide with a car that you put together in an hour, you can be like, okay, let's test a bunch of different contexts. Are you starting at home? Is this a party scenario? Is this something that you drive only when you're out camping in the woods? Are you going to a store? Are you going to work? Are you driving to like Mexico? Are you transporting packages or children or groceries or giant rocks? And these are things that you can very quickly and dynamically permute in and out with the user over the course of a longer dedicated one-on-one experiment and watch their behavioral reactions as you change it back and forth. This is how the controls work. We just try different controls and the person calls it out. Different shapes of vehicle just takes as long as it takes to assemble different shapes of cardboard. dashboard. And in the process, you might learn things like how many people they want to fit, what configuration do they want to be in, what physical position they want to sit in. Do they want to be lying down looking at the sky, sitting in a circle, all looking at their surroundings, right? Like what's the right kind of geometry of everything? Yeah, so that's an example of kind of breaking down and testing sub questions. And what happens when you test all the sub questions is that suddenly it is astronomically easier to test all your bits and pieces separately and then put it together into a redesign. And you can do that in a few days. You can address all of your top car questions with very easy separate answers and then get an educated pivot. You start getting this qualitative grammar from the users. Is this something they want? Because anything that provokes a strong response is an opportunity. Here are some non-car examples of really fast prototypes that we've done like this. We did a project with an enterprise SaaS platform. They wanted to build a back office tool for HVAC. The top questions were things like, what do executives buy this? And what do technicians need? And can we successfully get technicians to use our end technician facing app and then feed all the data back to the manager level and then the executive? So there was an executive dashboard that they mocked up in a Word document. There was a manager facing dashboard. There's a hypothetical end-to-end case study to help the executives visualize. And we just had them talk out loud on our side of the team. And then we just hired a bunch of HVAC technicians to come and do inspections of our house while we swapped out this fake screens on fake tablets to see how they were using our technical guides on their walkthroughs. And the key here is that actually the less pretty it is, the more people will give you on-point feedback. If you put a really polished prototype in front of someone, they will think you mean it. And it will be awkward because they'll be like, oh, this is not good. But if you put like a pen and paper prototype that you could not possibly mean, they focus on the substance. Here's another example in consumer goods. It was luxury fitness earbuds where the cost doesn't matter, but the earbud size is the real limiting factor. And their top question on their confidence line is what features are important in a fitness scenario. So we had people shopping for a fitness scenario in a realistic simulation, and then they had cards to mix and match features. And based on which features they picked, were like, would you like a giant earbud or a tiny one? So we could figure out that when push came to shove and they were confronted with having giant ass earbuds, which features they really cared about in order to keep the size small. This was an internal enterprise process project that we did where this company did a lot of AI data handling before AI was cool. And they wanted to build an AI ethical data use assessment process that dev teams could use to assess their projects. So this is pure internal process design. So you outline the process. Again, you make this kind of ugly thing, get people to respond to it, figure out what's realistic, find the moments of truth here. And then the biggest moment of truth in the process was a team actually doing an AI ethical assessment. So we took a real team, but on a previous project that was already over, and then had them do the live trial on that, figured out using nothing but spreadsheets what their assessment process was and how they responded to it. And then from there, we're able to redesign it several times, pivot it several times until they launched the tool that's been active for several years now. If you're a simple consumer digital platform, we build what we call as a minimum unviable product. This is a version that we built using Google Slides. And I like about this that you can see how ugly it is because it hangs off the side. It has to be grammatically parsable, but it doesn't have to be elegant. And the less elegant it is, the more they will focus on the content. This is the same thing done in about 30 minutes with Claude. We're talking about prototyping to pivot. So a pivot gets triggered when you test your biggest risks about 5 times. A typical big project needs 2 to 3 big pivots to get to the right answer. If we need 3 pivot cycles to solve the project, which requires 5 to 6 tests per cycle, how long does it take to do this? You do it in a very traditional way where you build the whole thing. If you didn't get it right the first time, you just fail. In a classic lean model, maybe you're spending a few months per cycle pre-pivot, 2 to 6 months. So you're talking about 6 to 12 months in order to solve the project. If you are doing it ad hoc and just like beelining, optimizing, testing only what really matters, only your top risks, then you can do it in a few weeks. So this is the architecture of the prototype thinking process that I was describing. First cycle of testing, you break the assumptions and start building the language. The second one, you're solving and pinning down the right language and the right segmentation and the right value props. And then additional testing goes to validation and then refinement and detailed design. When we are testing, how do we know that we're on the right track? Our second building block principle is called finding the magic moment. And the magic moment is this very qualitative reaction, right? It's this kind of come forward moment. It's this moment when you're putting something in their hand lens that has the potential to make a really transformative difference to them. And you can see that their eyes light up and they're like, yes, this is something that's going to change my life. In order to evaluate a magic moment is what we call the impact value scale. And it goes like this. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is horrible and 10 is mind-blowing and 5 is normal, how valuable is the solution to you? So I want to give an example of how we identify this and how it works. Let me ask you guys, when Uber first came out, how valuable was it for you? 7? Yeah. 7 or 8? Yeah. Okay. Lots of 9s and 10s here. Different question. On the same scale, back in the day, how would you rate taking a cab? 3 to 5. 2, 1. Wow. Somebody really hated cabs. 5. All right. Somebody had great cabs. Awesome. So Uber typically scores an 8 or a 9, depending on what city you're in. And a cab typically scores an average around a 3. If you get a 3-point offset between the value of your service and the status quo, that is the tipping point for behavior change, which is really interesting because it means that better is not enough. It has to be a certain qualitative amount of better. And indeed, like this is my favorite mug. It's like this perfect ergonomic shape and I love it. And like it's a fabulous texture. This mug is like a 5 for me. This mug is like a 7. If I'm taking them out of the mug drawer, I will always pick this mug. But if my 7 mug is across the room and my 5 mug is like right next to me, I'm just going to drink out of the mug that I have right next to me. A 3-point offset is better enough to get up and change your behavior and adopt a new process for it. It's also kind of the key for word of mouth marketing, that you had a good enough experience that it motivates you to bother to talk to other people about it. And suddenly you're not fighting a marketing uphill battle. What happens a lot is that we have things that come out in market that are better. A 1-point difference is like a little bit better. The tricky thing about a 2-point difference is that everybody agrees that it's obviously better, yet somehow nobody adopts it. So let me use my internet provider experience. I used to have Comcast. It was a 2 to get it set up every time. Now I have Google Fi. You know what I can say about Google Fi? It's completely normal. I go to a website, I fill in some information for a few seconds, I sign up and I push a button and now I have it. It's nothing to write home about in principle because this is my basic expectation of how to sign up for anything, which means it's a 5. But oh my God, the alternative is 2 hours on the phone with Comcast and waiting all day for your technician to come in. And that's like my 2. I hands down will go out of my way to get Google Fi and I talk about it. So that's my 5 compared to a 2. So let me ask you guys, what is the status quo of the thing that you're building? If your status quo is a 4, that means it's like kind of mildly unpleasant, but like fine. Then you're shooting for at least a 7, which is very nice, but not mind blowing. And it also means that if your status quo is like a 6 and you're trying to shoot for a 9, that's probably too high and you probably have the wrong niche. You probably want to go and niche yourself into a lower steps. And then the last building block that I'm going to cover quickly, we make our progress roadmap by confidence and by risk, not by completion. So let me explain how confidence works. On a scale of 0 to 100%, if I were to ask you to take your current best guess about how to design your product, how confident are you that your current best guess is the right answer? Are you like 50%? 20%, 90%. Confidence will go up over time. When we start out and have an initial concept, we often have false confidence because we're like, oh yeah, this is totally the right answer. I talked to some people, it's great. Only behavioral testing with users increases real confidence. If there is one thing that I want to ask you guys to get out of this workshop, it is this. No matter how hard you work and what you're doing, you can only get about 15 to 20% more confident in a single step. It means that if you test your biggest assumptions and run some quick behavioral tests and do it over the course of 3 days, versus if you build the entire product and then run some extremely high fidelity behavior tests, you will still only get 15 to 20% confidence in one jump per 5 to 6 users. But that's actually like really liberating because it means that we don't have to shoot for higher than that. It means that if you're working on something and you only feel 15% confident about it or 40% confident about it, the reason that we're stuck is because as high performers who got here, as people who want to do a good job and as people who are prepared to work hard, we get taught from childhood that you don't leave the gate until you can get an A. You don't put something out there until you can nail it and you know that everyone will love it and that it will be successful. So then what happens is that we sit here at our like 40% confidence and we're like, will this get me the A? No, that doesn't make sense. Is this the thing that will get me 90% confidence successful? No, I don't feel great about that either. Right. And you're like, okay. And suddenly you're like talking in circles. You're like, okay, but this is better than this for this reason. But what if we do this other thing? Right. And then you're like, but I can't try them all. Right. And the answer is that, and you're stuck there because it's not possible. Like you don't have the context and the information and the data and the perspective and the language to ladder yourself up. So instead, what you just say is, okay, I'm sitting here and I feel 20% confident about this idea. And that's not a lot, but that's great because I've identified what I don't know. So what is the fastest and easiest experiment I can run to get me to just 35% confident? My only goal is to increase my confidence by 15%.